Welcome to the Art of Procurement podcast. My name is Philip Ideson, a 20-year procurement practitioner, former head of procurement and advisor to procurement leaders around the world. I started Art of Procurement to help leaders and their teams access the resources they need to increase their impact through insight-driven procurement. You are listening to our flagship podcast where we pull back the curtain and shine a light on the strategies, tactics and tools that leading procurement teams are using to align their impact with the needs of their business. And today on the Art of Procurement, I want to share an interview that I recorded towards the end of 2020 with a returning guest, Tom Graham of procurement and supply chain executive search firm Berwick Partners. You may recall that in the middle of 2020, I chatted with Tom to get insights into how the CPOs that he was speaking to were responding to the pandemic and planning for the rest of the year. That was back in June of last year. As CPOs move from the short term to the mid-term planning, a topic that we've both seen is that CPOs have been concerned that they're asking both themselves and their teams really to do too much just to keep the wheels on, leading to burnout and employee wellness issues. So Tom and I, we're actually going to be deep diving into this topic in a roundtable discussion with procurement leaders in early February within AOP Mastermind. But in the conversation today for the podcast, Tom actually shares some tactics and techniques that procurement leaders can use and that he sees are using to help maintain a healthy workforce among the intensity that is pandemic response. Well, let's go into the interview where I start by asking Tom how he has seen the mood and priorities change for the CPOs that he works with over the past couple of months.
I think the mood's changed quite significantly. I think that as time has gone on, there's been two major points, particularly in the UK and Europe, of what's shifted up the priority list. I think from an operational point of view and a scenario planning point of view, Brexit is now much higher on the agenda than COVID in the sense that a lot of the contingency planning and resilience side and operational issues, I wouldn't say have been fixed through COVID, but measures had been put in place. Yeah. But I think certainly as time had progressed, it was evident from discussions that I'd been having that the concerns had moved away from sort of supply chain and operational challenges and much more into managing teams and the challenges CPOs and leaders are having managing their people.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel like there's kind of a recognizance that what's been going on so far in terms of what the pressure that teams have been put under isn't necessarily sustainable?
I think a lot have realised that there's been, to an extent, an illusion that people have been collaborating during this period, and actually a lot of people have been rallying during the crisis. And I think they recognise that this isn't sustainable long term. I think that as time goes on, McKinsey's written a report that says mental fatigue is now a lot of people's default. And I think that's really kicking in. I spoke to one procurement executive who quite nicely said that as humans, we like a beginning, a middle and an end. Yeah. And we're still very much in the middle of this crisis. And I think that particularly as we now enter a second wave and certainly where I'm in the UK and for a lot of Europe, a second lockdown, I think we're now going to see a different approach to how people feel about the crisis compared to how it was in the first, and therefore their engagement to a business, to their work, to their productivity.
Do you feel like the first time round there was kind of almost like a camaraderie behind we're all in this together, let's get through it. It's different, but in terms of, yes, that was frightening in some regard, but it's also exhilarating in that it's different and we're all going to find new ways of working. And now everyone's just kind of, like you say, fatigued about it all.
I think there was the kind of the perverse nature of, oh wow, this is something completely different. Let's see how this is going to pan out and how this is going to feel. That as however many 6, 7, 8, 9 months have kind of rolled on, we recognise that we are very much in the middle of something that seems to be sustained. And I think, absolutely, people rallied during the crisis. There's been absolutely positive things that have happened as a result of this. It's really broken kind of inherent working behaviours or beliefs that things couldn't be done remotely. In some cases, has massively improved certain people's quality of work-life balance, particularly in some of the Asian, sort of APAC regions, where so often CPOs could find themselves on planes 2 or 3 times a week and have realised that actually they can do this from home. But I think there's also a huge piece that there's been missed, that actually what this lockdown has done is really highlighted workforce inequalities. Those that have a productive or quite nice working from home environment versus those that don't. There's a report written, I think called the Lancet Psychiatry, which was the University of Manchester and the University of London, which said that actually those that are most impacted are people between 18 and 25 or up to 34, and highlighted that if there was to say a particular type of individual which is going to be impacted significantly by this, it was going to be a single mum living in a small home with young children. And I think things like that have been missed. I think that the workplace had, to an extent, kind of created this equal environment that we perhaps weren't as aware about as we are today.
Yeah, it's like, you check the home life at home when you walk through the doors of the office, and everyone becomes an equal as you...
To an extent, I mean, I think it's there's so many different aspects to it. I mean, there's part of it that said, look, actually seeing your manager or the exco on video in normal clothes with kids and animals kind of running around them, it's kind of broken down some of that kind of hierarchical beliefs and kind of deals in their mentality. But I don't think what it hasn't done is the social aspects of that. I mean, if you're a CPO of a FTSE 100 business, the chances are that you've got a pretty nice living condition. You are, and you have your home office. Where if you're one of the more younger generations, you are probably living in shared accommodation and perhaps working from your bedroom. So I think that has that gulf and gap has kind of heightened over time. And I think everything that comes socially with that as well. I think, but from what I've been discussing with a lot of CPOs, the younger generations feel that they are losing more of a connection tissue to the business, not only from the social benefits that they will have from being in an office and working with people that may be of a kind of a similar age, and that may be their main social bubble, but actually just what the younger generations get from being with people daily, the sidebar conversations, the picking up ways of working off some of their more senior peers. And I think that what we found as lockdown has rolled on is, yes, everyone has become incredibly efficient. Yes, decisions are being made quickly. But actually what has happened also is that development and creativity and innovation has actually stalled. And I think that's really highlighted more in some of those younger generations too. And that's also, I think, reflected with management styles. A lot of CPOs I've spoken to are quite concerned that their more junior and mid-managers do not have the right training or skills to lead their teams. They've never been exposed to this, and they traditionally may have managed heavily through presenteeism. And with that gone, with people having to try and find new ways and develop new skills to manage teams in this kind of hybrid world or world of remote working. So I think what we found as lockdown has gone on is that actually the challenges have increased. Mental fatigue has increased, disengagement has increased, the connection tissue and to an extent loyalty to the business may have dwindled, which can then obviously have a huge impact on things like big business partnering, stakeholder management, getting buy-in for CPOs to set a vision and strategy over the next 3 to 6 months or 12 months. When actually for a lot of their team, they're still fatigued and unsure about their long-term security in a business.
So what has that meant for the CPOs themselves, in terms of the effects on leadership styles, more, you talked about, which I think is such a great comment that you made about, you recognize the differences, the inequality of people's working conditions and ability to focus at certain times of the year because of everything that's going on around them, whether they got kids, whether they're caring for elderly relatives, whatever that may be. How as a leader do you take all that into account when you're, one, managing those as individuals, but two, figuring out how can I collectively get the most out of my team without pushing them too far?
It's a massive, massive question mark, and I think that's where there's not really a blanket answer, and this is where leaders have to demonstrate true leadership skills, and those that can be, I suppose, a true leader will be the ones that succeed. And I sense that perhaps you're going to ask me to elaborate on what I mean by that, so there's different elements, but I think fundamentally their leadership styles and decisions have to be seen as authentic.
Mm-hmm.
If their teams feel that their responses to this crisis and them as individuals seems a little bit scripted, I think that the challenges we've spoken around about engagement and loyalty will only widen. But from a style and behaviour perspective, I think that it is an absolute given now that leaders must manage based on outputs and recognise that there has to be kind of greater flexibility around that. But that can't be a blanket approach. There can be too much focus on this. And by kind of solely focusing on measuring someone, managing someone to an output, you may, like I said previously, forget about how you're actually developing them and making sure that they're broadening their kind of knowledge and skill set. That you also need to appreciate around those inequalities that some people's living environments make it incredibly difficult to manage in that standardized manner of outputs. But they also need greater EQ, and EQ's been talked about throughout this crisis, but there's nothing normal about this new normal, and we're still in this transient phase. So I think leaders have to recognise, and again, be authentic in the recognition that for a lot of people, this is still an incredibly unsettling time.
Mm-hmm.
I think where there's greater complexity as well is when you find that you are a CPO of a global organisation. The cultural nuances of how you communicate effectively are going to really be tested. A company-wide email written in English may be interpreted in one country much different to it will be in another. I think there also has to be the realization that certain cultures will respond differently and may not be as open about speaking up about certain issues as there are others. So there isn't really an answer. I think that from a leadership perspective, they need to be decisive, they need to be authentic, but there's then lots of different plates that they have to be spinning in terms of style and behaviours to make that work well.
Now, would you recommend leaders to show kind of their vulnerabilities? And that's something that's really hard as a leader. We talked actually off mic about the fact that a lot of CPOs don't necessarily know the answer right now. Is there something to be said for showing that they don't necessarily know the answer?
I think one of the biggest challenges the CPO is facing right now is that walking that tightrope of trying to set a strategy for the next 12 months and re-engage a disengaged or fatigued workforce whilst not having all the answers. And I don't think there's a solution to that at all. I mean, I've spoken to some that have been quite honest in saying, I'm trying to plan for 2021, 2022. Yeah, I've got teams asking me about their job security and I can't give them answers because I don't have that right now. And I think that there's not really, I think the only solution to that is being honest. I think generally across all leadership, and this is not nuanced to procurement, the ability to show greater empathy, to show vulnerability is going to be a leadership skill the good leaders will need to have more. Having the confidence and self-confidence, and that may be innate, to show vulnerability, I think people will buy into. And I think that again comes down to that authenticity point. I think without recognizing that there are challenges and leaders are showing maybe struggling too, I think again people just will not buy that. So yeah, I absolutely think it's important.
I do want to come back to something when you're talking about managing by outputs or managing on outputs, and I do think that's really important. It's something I've advocated for throughout my career, to be honest with you, probably because I've always liked a flexible working arrangement where I believe that my outputs would always kind of demonstrate the impact that I'm having on the business for themselves, rather than the amount of hours or the time of day that you sit behind a computer. And I just wanted to come back to say that managing by outputs doesn't necessarily mean, it doesn't have to be really rigid that I'm going to set you on your own. You're going to come back to me with this output in a month's time or in 2 weeks' time or whatever, and go about it in your own way. You can still have all the support systems around somebody, but it's changing expectation as a leader of when somebody may be available. Don't necessarily just always, if the red light is on Outlook, that's to say that they're not online at the moment. Don't count that against them. I think is really what I wanted to say around that. That you don't need to forget in terms of you can still manage them from a personal perspective, but just be a lot more flexible in helping them get in what they need to get the job done.
Yeah, completely. I think that the kind of the world of presenteeism didn't stop in the office. I think that certain managers, to your point, will have constantly been seeing maybe more inexperienced managers who have traditionally managed through presenteeism may have still been using, I suppose, a checking up approach on team chat or email or whatever, and thinking that actually if there's not responses quickly, then there's question marks over there. Essentially, this, and as much as the cliche it is, it comes down to whether or not you're a manager or you're a leader. And if you are still looking to check up on people based on that, then you are those skills are no longer required and kind of fit for purpose in the world that we find ourselves. I think the managing outputs piece will be interesting as well, though, because for me it is a bit of a throwaway comment unless it's done properly. And what I mean by that is we would have all seen environments, whether it be procurement where promotions are measured on savings, or sales where promotions are measured on fees brought in. I think it's dangerous to just have a blanket approach to what an output is across a business. And that's where, if it's going to be done, it needs to be done properly and with thought. And to measure two people the same way based on the same output, I think would only disengage people more. Because again, it comes down to inequalities, it comes down to circumstances, everything around that. So if it's going to be done, thought needs to be given to it.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And that's probably going to be quite a challenge, isn't it? Because you think traditionally, you have your end goals that you want to achieve, and, you spread some of the responsibilities and the objectives and you cascade them down within your organization. But there's still an element of gut feel that comes into whether somebody succeeds or whether they don't succeed. They may not meet their objective or their output, but that they've created some really strong relationships somewhere else. And there's a little bit of give or take. And if you're just going strictly to outputs only, it's a little bit more black and white.
Completely. And I think what we've found as well with this crisis is that actually the best leaders are those that can really manage people. And it does come down a bit to people management and caring about the people that you have working for you, or at least just having an understanding of what their personal situation is. I think that, however, it's not something that can really or has really been developed. You can't have gone from black to white from this crisis or not. And the point I mean there is the ones that can do that successfully are the ones that have already built good relationships based on trust and outputs pre-crisis. If it's something that's probably been built on presenteeism, and then you're suddenly trying to I suppose, change your style, I think again it cannot look authentic or sincere, and again fall into the same problems.
Yeah, it's like it's that vulnerability, I think, again, and actually talking to your team about why you're trying to do things differently. Like you're all kind of learning this together, and that sometimes that it may seem like decisions you make or actions you take don't seem like that your team may not agree with them, but you're actually trying to get to a place where you can be more. That the actions, the changes you're making are authentic to what you're trying to do, even though it's not a linear path to get there.
Yeah, exactly. And it comes down to communication, and you need to be a strong communication, and you need to be able to, and then it comes down to those innate leadership skills as well, the ability to communicate clearly and effectively. And it doesn't mean that you have to explain every single action, but it has to kind of create that sense of pulling through something together. And it has been, as much as it said, this has been an unprecedented period for everyone, and it has meant that leaders have had to develop these new skills and ways of working to kind of get everyone on board and staying together.
Now, one of the things that I've heard from a lot of CPOs, and I'm interested to know if you've heard the same, is this concern about employee burnout. that we're really pushing our people so hard. And it's not that, I mean, the CPOs are doing it to themselves as well. So it's not like they're sitting there in an office and making everybody else do all the work. But there's this concern about burnout. And I just wonder if that's something that you're hearing as well with the CPOs you talk to.
I think it kind of extends a little bit further than burnout. I think mental health is without doubt the CPO's biggest concern. A recent research piece I did stated that 86% of CPOs I spoke to were concerned about their team's mental health, and unanimously they feel unprepared. And I think there's two different pieces of this. There's the immediate and there's the ongoing. I think the immediate concern is that working remotely is a lot harder to spot than it would be in an office. The ability to quickly put a smile on and pretend everything's okay is on screen is a lot different to being able to do that for 10 hours sat at a desk in an office. I think there's other factors around kind of social anxiety and social anxiety that some CPOs have talked to me around the difference in coping between introverts and extroverts. Some actually feeling that particularly the extroverts, that they are struggling to work effectively remotely by having coffee conversations with stakeholders virtually that they would have traditionally done in an office environment. But I think that actually what we're going to see as time goes on is this becoming more and more of an issue and challenge. I think that there will be further job cuts, and whilst it may not affect a leader and someone in their team, it could affect their partners. There will be more deaths, which again could affect their partners. As we see more redundancies, I have heard of certain businesses struggling with individuals of their team taking on more responsibilities to prove that they are more of worth to the business.
So to protect to feel like they're protecting their role.
Exactly. I think that one of the biggest challenges, and I don't really know where the solution will be, but which has been raised a few times, is around how you can encourage or I suppose show your team that it is okay to say that you are not okay. And I think that when you then put the slant on of kind of diversity and inclusion and things like that, that's a really challenging mix. One CPO said to me that they were concerned that a BAME member of their team may have been struggling but didn't want to admit that because they were going for promotion and felt that it could impact their chances of getting a promotion in the future. And I think the ability to have those honest conversations is going to be really, really difficult.
Are there things I think, part of the answer before even I'm asking the question does go back to that authenticity. But it's like, how can a CPO create a safe space that enables those conversations to take place? Where people feel as though they can actually have that conversation and it is disassociated from anything from a career perspective, but it's truly about you as an individual and your health and your mental health, and that doesn't impact, what's going to happen 6 months or 12 months or 24 months down the line.
There's probably 1,000 different answers to this question, but I do think that the authenticity is probably actually the one that you can kind of apply to all. I think leaders really need to demonstrate that if they are concerned about individuals' mental health, that a virtual coffee that may feel a little bit contrived may not be the only approach that they need across 20 members of their workforce. And I don't want to kind of say that flippantly and suggest that they're not useful tools, because of course they are. But I think it really comes down to showing a genuine concern and I suppose care of their team members and if or their direct reports, and ensuring that kind of culture of care is cascaded throughout their function or organisation. It has to start from the top. I think that if it's not demonstrated or it's not believed from the most senior person within the business or the function, then there'll always be question marks as to the approach. So I know some CPOs are just doing things like making sure that on some meetings they are still in their gym gear to kind of demonstrate that it is absolutely okay to step away from your desk and have a life outside of that, or they do have the dog or kid on their lap. And I think there are some fairly straightforward techniques like this, but I think essentially it also just comes down to genuinely showing that appreciation and care for the team.
Now, there'll be some CPOs that are leaders that don't necessarily have that relationship with their team for whatever reason. You know, their leadership style is different. There may be less of a trusted relationship, and that's not something that you can flick a switch and all of a sudden all your team feel comfortable in coming and talking to you about these things. So, you talked about it's still that we still need to lead these discussions from the top, but do you see other ways that a CPO or a leader can put in place a structure that perhaps doesn't include them as the point of contact, if you will, where there's others on the teams who perhaps have better relationships or are seen as being more empathetic, or even bringing in folks from HR or from, wherever it may be, to still at least create that so the messaging can still be relayed ultimately to the CPO, but that an individual's relationship with that person isn't going to dictate whether they feel comfortable in speaking out.
Yeah, and again, I think this really comes down to the question of what makes a good leader anyway. And in my opinion, it's the confidence or the ability to know what their strengths are, know what their I suppose weaknesses, for want of a better phrase, are not. And some of the greatest leaders out there are people that may be, for example, highly introverted and recognize that this kind of camaraderie and kind of natural charisma is not what their strength is. However, that then really comes down to, in my opinion, knowing that and having recognized that and ensuring that you put people around you who will complement that area that you need. And I think that's where that again comes down to just strong leadership skills and the recognition that if you know that that's not something you're going to be good at, ensuring that there is a team in place. And that doesn't have to be just procurement. It could be, like you say, someone in HR or someone else, to be able to have those conversations to ensure that this is just not a kind of an area that's
ignored,
left in the grey, if you see what I mean. Yeah.
No, Tom, I know it's about time to wrap up today's conversation, but I think this is going to be a really, really important issue as we're going into 2021. I think it's only going to get more important. So I really want to thank you for coming on and talking about some of the things that you're hearing and, the research that you're doing on the topic. And it's something that we want to stay on top of because we want to try and give both professionals, really professionals at all levels, as many tools as they possibly can have, or ideas or inspiration of how to deal with this, because, like I say, it's only going to become a bigger issue. So, first of all, thank you for joining us today.
No, thank you. It's been really good to speak again, and it's a massive topic, but it's a leadership topic that's not innate to procurement, and I think that we must recognise that this is a challenge that everyone's going through together for the first time, and it's going to come with its challenges. No one is going through this and doing as well as they possibly could be. It's a learning experience for everyone. So happy to kind of share insights from what I've been told in the market, and I hope it's kind of helpful to some.
Yeah, and the very last question is, if folks have listened to the podcast, they're interested in connecting directly with you, what's the best place for them to go? Where can they find you?
So the best place to probably find me is on LinkedIn. Yep. So my name's Tom Graham, and I'm with Berwick Partners, part of the Odgers group. And I'm a executive search consultant or headhunter. So always welcome discussions, happy to share any insight or the research findings with anyone that is listening, and happy to help any way I can.
Okay, great. Well, what I'll do is I'll include the link to your LinkedIn profile on the show notes for today's episode. Those are going to be at artofprocurement.com/podcast. That's artofprocurement.com/podcast, and just search for this episode if it's not right there at the top with Tom Graham. So Tom, one last time, I just want to thank you so much for joining me. I want to thank you for listening into today's episode of The Art of Procurement. To go deeper, including access to transcripts and actionable outtakes from the podcast, join the free level of our AOP Mastermind community. To learn more, go to artofprocurement.com/mastermind. And to find our entire back catalogue of almost 400 episodes, go to artofprocurement.com